Hello coaches, this is a recent interview we did with Tim Lees. Please subscribe to the page for more content and also check out Tim's full webinar available on the link below. Thank you. First and foremost, Tim, welcome back. Super excited to have you back on Modern Soccer Coach.
Thanks, Gary.
I mean, we haven't spoken a long time, and obviously with social media, a lot of us aren't doing as much as we once were. So I think once we got you on and announced that on Sunday, there was obviously a really good response. Your message resonates with a lot of coaches. Bielsa's been there a few years. Guardiola's been there 5 years. I mean, what's your opinion on both of them at the minute?
If I go off kind of my personal, if I look at games, there's certain teams or certain managers that I'll enjoy watching. So from a personal perspective, I think the first time I watched back like Bielsa was under Bilbao. I think, do you remember the Man United game where they beat him in 2011, 12, something like that? That was the first time I'd seen anything. I remember watching thinking, what is this? I mean, at the time I was at Wigan and we were implementing a certain style of play. And I remember seeing that and thinking, this is beyond anything that we're comprehending, anything that's going on at the minute. So I've been a big fan of his, of Bielsa since then. Obviously followed his path and then was always hoping he'd get an opportunity to come in England. And then Leeds came up, obviously did a fantastic job in the Championship first of all. And then it's just been brilliant to see his philosophy, albeit I know recently they've had so many injuries and they've been depleted, which is obviously playing a massive part in how they're doing at the minute. But certainly his first couple of years, amazing to watch. And then Guardiola, I mean, his Barcelona team for me was the most enjoyable, my favourite team, certainly in my lifetime anyway, that I'd ever seen. So yeah, two massively influential coaches that certainly anytime their teams are on TV, I'd always sit down and watch.
We're starting to see the youth of Man City now breaking through, and obviously there's a lot of English talent there as well. You've been to the States and obviously working at the top level in England. We'll get to the tactics later on, but I mean, what have you seen the Guardiola effect?
To be honest, I think it's everywhere. I mean, if you think back to 10 years ago, at every single level, Guardiola's had a massive impact on everywhere, from all the way down to grassroots, all the way down to semi-professional, non-league. I mean, teams now play a style of play in kind of perceived lower down levels that you would never see years ago. Every player that plays under him, more or less every single player, you see a massive improvement from a technical and a thinking side, the ability to find spaces, and particularly on the technical side, you see just huge changes in the behaviours and the way they play. So I think, yeah, just an enormous impact. You have these coaches, don't you, who, if you read back through history, there's certain coaches that impact, from a tactical point of view, but impact the game. So Cruyff 70s, Saki 4-4-2, zonal defending. And if you look now, certainly in my lifetime, Guardiola's the most influential coach.
Do you think that the modern coach almost has a responsibility? You mentioned there about improving players. Do you think that's starting to come more and more into what we're seeing with the Tuchels, the Guardiolas, the Pochettinos, in effect, making individuals better?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think they improve through A, the coaching, and B, the style of play. But certainly, if we're looking from a youth perspective, there's a massive, in my opinion anyway, there's a huge responsibility to have a collective style of play and an individual development program as well. I think obviously when you start getting more to the first team, it's certainly based results more. So it is about the collective, but at the same time, the benefits of improving individuals is going to help the collective. So I think certainly youth, individual, more important. And as you start getting to first team, collective, but they have a massive impact on each other, yeah.
We're going to go through two videos here. They're just short. One, they're from your webinar that you did last year. And I just cut two of them up. They were the two at the start. I didn't want to give away too much. So I want to give away the two of the things we're going to talk about today, which is basically the theory side and the practice, the step one on the philosophy, and then step one on the principles. So this is 8 minutes long. Coaches, if you want to watch the full webinar, Tim has it available on the website, and I will put that up alongside it. Highly recommend. It's 2 hours long, and it's this, like, the whole thing is just absolutely brilliant.
Just to make it clear from this, the term 70% possession is more of a reference point to begin with than to be used as a pure isolated statistic alone. having only the percentage of possession as a measure of performance to me is like having pass completion. It's a bit pointless because it could actually be damaging in the long run in terms of teams going side to side and using possession just as a measure of we are doing well. It signals to everyone the intent in the game and the intent of the team. And so taking the initiative, are we moving the ball into the final third constantly? Are we being offensive? Are we creating chances? Are we in control of the game? First time I learned about 70% possession being really objective and in terms of where on the pitch was at Wigan. And I had the under-16s team, they were really dominating the ball against teams, but one of the first team staff highlighted to me that it was in the wrong areas. They came down and during sessions we would play games 11v11 and they would have 2 stopwatches. One on the time for possession and then one they would start every time the team in possession, i.e. the team that we were working with, got into the opposition's half, and they would measure at the end how much of the time on one stopwatch was spent in the opposition's half with that possession. And at the time, my guess was way off in terms of what it would have been. So it's more to use some of the key indicators of how visually the style looks. Are we the team whose centre-backs are spending the majority of their time on the halfway line? Is the possession that we have leading to efficiency in terms of creating chances? Are we putting people in front of the goalkeeper? Are we locking the opposition in their deep, compact shape and as close to their box as possible without the ball? Are we defending the halfway line with our lives and not our goal? In terms of the first bit, DNA, it has to be in your DNA and everything, this dominating the ball. It's got to dominate the content, it's got to dominate your conversations, your feedback, your 6-week reviews, your coach meetings, your coach education. Everything has to be in sync throughout the club. The big lesson I've learned in time is if there's a hole in the boat, the whole thing sinks. So this has to be in the DNA in everything that you do. Second thing, focus on what you do and not the opposition. Spend most of your time in development ages on what you do. Don't worry too much about the opposition. Within games, there might be bits where you have to change, but the older you get, the closer to the first team. I understand that percentage is going to increase towards the opposition, but focus on what you do, and if you get what you do right, you will control the opposition. Would you recognise them in different shirts? So are we recognisable if you put different kits on the team? Would you instantly see the style and the principles and know by the way it moves and way the game model's executed? Would it look the exact same? Bigger than any one group or bigger than any one player? There'll be times when players don't buy into it, especially when things go wrong. It's easy to tell the centre-back to shell it. It's easy to allow that centre midfield just to hook the balls on when they're in space. Every player has to be accountable to the club for this way of playing and this DNA. And it's long-term. It's bigger than any one individual. Reference point. I'm going to steal Pep Linders' phrase for this, which is, it has to be the lighthouse that guides us all. There's got to be a clear approach to every single game, a reference of playing. And these variables don't change. There's one ball, there's one pitch, you own the ball, you own the pitch. It's down to you to impose your style on the opponent and control what happens. And you'll hear people say, well, how you play will depend on how the opposition sets up, how they defend. No, rubbish. You dictate to the opposition where they defend by doing what you do with the ball. Again, this is going to be a lot clearer as we get on through this presentation. Zero wavering, zero compromising. There's going to be moments when some staff members don't want to go with you, when they want to go their own way, when things go bad, when mistakes happen, when you're trying to implement things, that's frequent mistakes happening. And this comes down to the strength of the leader of the club, the leader of the team, the manager. This comes down to you refusing to move on. Some things are negotiable, some are non-negotiable, refusing to move on it, having ultimate belief in what you're trying to do. The onus is on you to impose yourself on the opposition. If your style's not being imposed on the opponent, then you have to figure out exactly why. You hear a lot of coaches saying, we don't have the players to play this way. Well, you have to watch the team. And for example, I've gone into clubs and say, oh, Tim, we don't have the players to play this way. Well, then you go down and you watch the players and you watch the teams, and the balance is all over the show. The movement's all wrong. The players don't get it. If you manage a team and not playing the way you want, I always try to look at myself first. Have I not explained it well enough? Have I not done enough reps in training? Have I done too much on opposed work? Have I not painted the pictures well enough in terms of going through on video, in terms of meeting them individually? Structural issues and principles are easy to fix. Technical issues take, depending on the individuals, they can take years to develop. So you may have to be creative in that interim period to help the individuals develop that creative style from a tactical point of view, going back to what Martinez was talking about before. For example, if you've got an under-19s group, my old under-19s group had an unbelievable centre midfielder in the middle, spider in the web, lacked mobility, lacked physicality, but we then had to come up with a solution to help him get through that game where he can still have his individual quality. So we'd play a double pivot where he wouldn't get exposed without the ball, whereas in an age group below we had like a Kante type player where we only needed to play one because he could cover the ground, and then we could use that extra player higher up in areas. And then the last one, it's got to come before winning. This has got to be the main aim for every single game, every single session. If you take care of the process, the winning will follow. I know some academy staff who will ask wingers to go and stand on the other side of the touchline before they make a substitution, and so they can kill time when they're coming off to play for results. They have to be accountable. Staff have to be accountable. My biggest fear when I was at Liverpool, for example, was a player going out of my group up into Pep Lijnders' groups, and them not being prepared for that, the standards being higher, them learning more. That was my biggest fear, and that as coaches, that's the way you should work. Now, before we get into the content of building this specific style and breaking it down, I do want to emphasise that I personally believe it's about learning principles and not particular prescribed movements or patterns, and these two philosophies are very, very different. The former, I coached for several years and always questioned why the patterns weren't coming out in games, and I just don't personally believe in positional fixed numbers. So your traditional 4-3-3 of the 2 goes here, the 5 goes here, the 4 goes here. I just think, in fact, that the way I believe in coaching is the complete opposite. I personally do not want to be responsible for teaching players to play to prescriptive movements where they can only orchestrate that together, and when once an individual leaves that particular team, they then find it difficult to apply the relevant techniques or skills in a different environment. So you don't want players who are only able to play to a specific beat. If you're looking at like a music analogy, you don't want the cover artist, you want the player who can freestyle, who can go a cappella, the one who can create the melody from nothing, and you can see and hear that rhythm in the bones. So all these complex rules you see, which are on here now and have a lot of different analysis documents where they've studied Guardiola and it's 3 players can only represent it in one horizontal line and you can only have 2 vertically in one channel. My opinion, this is for tactics boards coaches. It may look great when you're freeze framing, but always ask, right, what if this happens? What if this happens? Have you got individual techniques? Are you dropping in terms of relating to space and the opponents rather than prescribed patterns? Again, this tactical flexibility, I learnt the most under Martinez. First time I remember him saying, right, I want the boys to be able to go and play a back 3. I remember it being away at Coventry and I didn't have a clue what I was doing in terms of the back 3. I didn't know how they slid, how they covered, whether it was zonal, whether we were man marking. In terms of possession, did the centre-back go wide and high? What did the full-backs do? How did the midfielders react to that? So in terms of, it's important that coaches learn in this way as well, and this tactical flexibility. It's really easy to sit on a tactics board and have prescribed movements because it's very easy to manage and see from a coach's point of view. In my opinion, from my experience, the top coaches react to what's going on and teach principles rather than fixed movements.
Coaches, take a quick break here. Please check out Tim's full webinar available on the link below. And please also, if you're looking for exercises for your team, some centre forward ideas, some positional exercises. The new ebook out, MSC, 25 positional exercises for forwards. Ebook available now, modernsoccercoach.com/shop. Thank you. Tim, couple of questions for you about that. A couple of things jumped out to me. One of them being, you mentioned that 70% concept, and then the coach is telling you that it was in the wrong areas. Like, where were you moving towards, and where did they kind of redirect you? How did they do that?
Yeah, so it first happened at Wigan. So our youth teams were keeping possession really well, dominating the ball, but you come away and you'd have few shots on target, you create not many chances, you won't be putting players in front of the goalkeeper consistently. So it was a switching styles, and we basically worked off a stopwatch in possession, how much of the time is spent in the opponent's half. I think it's about territory and then being able to defend counter-attacks in possession better when you're defending the halfway line rather than defending the goal. And just making sure really that all exercises are referenced around that. So every exercise, whether it be a possession-based, has a half line, and just constantly always establishing the same behaviours. So yeah, I think a lot of teams that we had originally when we brought this style of playing, we're talking probably 10 years ago, the playing out from the back model, if you like. So the obsession with, okay, we have to play out from a goalkeeper. All right, well, most of the time your centre-backs are halfway in between, halfway in the half. So it's more about what we do generally in possession and principles from there, rather than just focusing on playing out from the back.
When you're getting those centre-backs higher up the pitch, and normally you don't associate player profiles with dribbling, does that now then add more to the centre-back, the skill profile of a centre-back now? Does carrying, ball carrying and dribbling, does that now have to be developed?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think you always have to take the identity of the player, in my opinion, Gary, and work with whatever you have. So if their strength isn't particularly the ability to step in, theirs might be consistency to find the free player. But kind of establishing those principles of first thought process, kind of find the highest player forward. Second thought process, if there's nobody on, can I step in to make that passing distance shorter for me and less risk on it when I'm playing through the lines? If nothing's on from there, can I then circulate? And what kind of you find with a lot of centre-backs is they'll circulate when there's a free player on. They'll step in when it's tight and it's closed and they should have circulated. So it's just more establishing them behaviours in that order, really. In my opinion, that's the way I work it.
The onus is on you to impose your style on the opposition. I thought this was great. You always hear coaches, or you often hear coaches blame opponents, referees. Do you think we should be more critical on ourselves when we're looking at this style of play? Should our standards be a little bit higher?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you even have, and I've done it myself previously in the past, you even have coaches who blame their own players. Oh, no, we can't play this way. We don't have the players for that way. Well, first protocol, I think you have to be able to look at the game objectively and say, right, and this helps when games are videoed. So when you're able to, can you see things in the moment and then watch back on the video? And is it what you thought? So if, for example, if I'm seeing something in a game and then I look back later and I go, well, you know, I might have been a bit harsh on that player, or he didn't play as well, or she didn't play as well as I thought, or my assessment was wrong. Well, that's a lack of ability from my point of view to be able to see real time what's actually happening. So I think having video enables you to look back and establish then, okay, is the information what I'm giving accurate? Yeah.
Question here from Sarah. This is really good. I was going to keep them to the end, but I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of questions. But I want to throw this in right now. She says, teaching flexibility to be able to anticipate your teammates and pick up cues from the game. How do you strike the balance in session design?
Yeah, good question. So I think for me, the more coaching I do every single year, I was thinking about this the other day actually. I kind of get and refine my practices all the time, and I'll come off sessions. And the first thing, going back to your point on your previous question, is I'll look at myself first and say, okay, if they're not doing something that I want them to do, is it because I've not articulated it clear enough? Have I not set enough practices up? Have I not broken it down from an individual point of view or a unit point of view? Have I not recreated it in terms of video, etc.? And I think again, it's about establishing your principles, that whatever your principles are, and being really consistent from them. So for me, Gary, and again, it's just the way I work, but I don't particularly change topics a lot in sessions. So it's not counter defending one week, high pressing another week. It's more always relating the same messages and the same behaviours around the style of play that we want. And that's in every single activity. So light switch transition when we lose possession. Does every possession, is it directional? So we can establish territory and move up the pitch together. Is there enough depth to it? So I've kind of come away from a lot of very, very tight possession based. So it relates more to the game. So just really manipulating every single activity that we do and being very consistent around the messages that we want out of games. And
that's really interesting there. So you don't generalize, like you don't pick the 4 moments and pick a moment. Is that because when you're trying to get those defenders higher up in possession, then you're looking at, you mentioned there in your webinar also about defend the halfway line, not the goal. Is that getting, so there's like no moment of the game happening in isolation almost? Is that something that you're looking to do there?
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. I think, Gary, it's more around the 4 moments exist, but more around one moment. So if we are in possession, for example, and we're in the opponent's half, when we're in possession, thinking about what happens when we lose it and vice versa, and making sure our shape from that, from a collective point of view, is always in positions to anticipate the turnover, if you like. So if we build the game really well, if we're at the half really well, collectively, we then can counter press really well. And then if we're really efficient in terms of shifting it out of their press and their tight space, then once with that kind of 4 or 5 second period, we've opened the pitch up again, then it's side to side, looking for the free play. As soon as we lose it and we're in positions to win it, we win it, shifting out of the pressure zone, we've got the shape again in that interim period. So I think if you look at kind of a 70% game model, Man City, Liverpool, if you look at all the top teams, that's kind of the way it looks. It's defenders having big spaces behind them, defending the halfway line, and then all moments kind of rolling into one, really. Obviously, so when you regain it, if you have opportunities where you can go and counter and go to goal, great. So, yeah, the moments kind of, for me, roll more into one.
Great question from Peter on the organisation for counter pressing there, about you're not reliant on fixed positioning. How do you ensure that the structure is there to cover appropriate spaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. So any team I work with, there's a structure that we believe in terms of the first 2 lines. So we either, and this comes from a lot of experience, so teams that I've had previously, I've found that when you defend with 4 players in balance, so whether it be 2 centre backs, 2 centre mids, 3 and a 1, I find that's when you get counter attack. So kind of learning through a lot of experience, having 5 players in balance. So if the fullback's gone, for example, one of our centre midfielders know they have to sit in. If we're playing in a back 3 and that's the system, and we're sitting with 1 pivot, well, when we go down one side, one of the other centre mids know they have to sit. So we've always had the structure of 3-2 or 2-3, depending on the opposition and the way they play, and that'll change from a 2 and a 3 to a 3 and a 2. But I think once you work that in practices, which is a great question by Peter, once you have that practices, then on the higher end where you have those 5 players, whether it be fullbacks gone on, wingers who are high, whatever you want, you then have lots of flexibility within that.
Okay, let's look at the second video, which is more about principles. Again, 10 minutes long. Coaches, please, I'll put the link up here. Please get yourself to the webinar. 2 hours of this here, and it's amazing. So please support it. We do these webinars and try to keep them as free as possible, on the condition that we support everyone that's doing some great stuff out in the coaching community, which Tim is. So please get yourself on and order the webinars. The questions are brilliant. Please keep them coming.
Let's put it under the microscope then. So let's get into the detail. I'm going to peel back the layers on what I put as 5 stages. Now, this is just my personal way of doing it. So first of all, stage 1 is all about getting to the half with possession, with comfortable possession. So as we were talking about before, if the opposition are pressing high or they're in the medium block, getting them to drop and getting them where our centre-backs are on the halfway line, and that is deemed a success in this stage. So success in this stage, no matter how the group decide to do it, is collectively positioning themselves where they're now on the halfway line. Now, there's lots of little subcategories and elements that come within this. You could talk about specific rotations, movements. I like to split it up into very simple principles. The first principle would be aggressive positioning. Now within this, if I play this video, this is a scenario of where the Reds are in a back four. A back three would be exact same in terms of principles. It's just the patterns would change slightly. Now, if the Yellows are setting up in a 4-5-1, which is very commonplace, the first thing is centre-backs have got on the ball. Now, if they press with the front two, they could come inside the box, they could drop down the box. You can set these up however you like in terms of the initial receiving from a keeper, receiving back from a full-back, receiving back as pressure relief from a centre-back in transition, however you want. But the centre-back's got hold of the ball, whatever the scenario is. So now, the opposition have got a decision to make. Do they go and press and leave space, or do they drop off? If they stay in this position, the first thing you want to do from a full-back's point of view now is test that winger. So on both sides, particularly on the right-hand side now, you want to say to the winger, right, I'm going to take you this way. So you just test him, his mentality straight away by going, right, I'm just going to drift 2-3 yards. If he stays here, you're available for second line passes over the top, bouncing off people or from the keeper over the top into second lines. If he decides now to start dropping, you've now created space for the centre-back. I would say most times the winger will think, I've got to go with him here to a certain point. And even if you're going this way now and you start making him drop just a couple of yards, that now gives more space in here to exploit this 2v1 or a centre midfielder dropping in or an arrival movement the principals will come to next. But effectively, you're creating more space for him to make a decision and make it easier for him. Centre-backs, you look at a 90% pass completion. So if you run through now the thought process of a centre-back, full-backs have taken the winger and given him space, they've taken him high. A centre-back's decision now is dependent on several factors. Space, movements, whose arrival movements come. But the first thing from a centre-back's point of view should be, can I find a free player? Now, if I start getting pressed from the side, that hurries the decision. But the first thing, can I find a free player in here? Now, if I start playing passes as a centre-back at that distance, the further you are away from the player that you're playing to, the more risky that pass becomes and the more likelihood of it being intercepted. So if you're on the halfway line and you're playing that pass in here, there's not a lot of risk because you just counter-press. But from this position, you're straight through on goal and you're available on transition. So this pass has to be the least amount of risk possible. So the thought process from a centre-back, first of all, should be, is there a free player and is it risky pass for me? Is a winger coming in off the side? Is it an 8? Is it a 10? However people want to deem the numbers. But first thing now, as a centre-back, can I minimise my passing distances? So can I step in with the ball? As I'm stepping in, I'm thinking about what can I see, what's open. Loads of centre-backs you see stepping in, head down, stepping in at 80, 90, 100% speed. And then the decision comes too late as they're getting pressed and it all closes up really quickly for them. Step in with the ball with your head up. You're assessing all the time what's open. You're looking and thinking who's going to be free. Now, if there's not a free player and you start getting pressed, you can start playing into higher lines, so there's no risk. If there is a free player, find him, first thing. If there's not a free player, can I step in? And as I'm stepping in, I either engage someone and draw them out, and I create a little free player, or I'm waiting for a free player to arrive. So it might be little movements off shoulders, little arrivals to come in, 9 dropping in, whatever it may be. So you're waiting for a movement to develop. Third thing, you may have to outplay. So you may have to use an outplaying technique from an individual point of view to be able to create a free player. So for example, it may be that I open my body and pretend to play to the fullback. The winger starts gambling now. And then as I do that, it's a reverse pass in here. It's a little drag to come inside here. It may be that I pretend to play to a centre-back over here on the circulation. It's a drop of the shoulder and I step in with it, which we'll see some clips of later. So, outplaying techniques as well. And if there's nothing on from that point of view, my last option would be, if there's no free player in here arriving and there's nothing else, then I'm going to circulate. So my last option should be from a circulation. It shouldn't be my first option. You see a lot of centre-backs passing responsibility on and circulating when they could have found a free player or stepped in and, I say, taking a bit of a risk more. So the circulation, if you need it, there, and then we can go out the other way. So you're going around that horseshoe or around the back three. Thought process, centre-backs. Find a free player, step in, outplay if I need to, or circulate. Now, as I'm doing this, it's very important that there's no set pattern to come through. So we may have to zigzag our way through the pitch, we might have to circulate. But what's important from a collective psychological point of view, we have to show calmness on the ball to get to the half. That will include slowing the game down and speeding it up. It's not one speed and it's not one tempo. One speed and one tempo generally allows opposition to slide and get across, and you just replicate in the picture. So circulation happens with the top teams to create a free player. So as that ball is circulating, whether it's a right back who's turned and they've gone back to centre back, whether it's a centre back who's played to a keeper, whether it's centre back who's chopped back, as this ball starts coming across now, we're looking for the circulation to create a free player. So whether it's the winger coming inside, a higher midfielder drop in, false nine coming in, whatever it may be, fullback going inside if you're Guardiola, you are looking to create a free player. If it comes back out and we're going the other way, as soon as that pass goes that way now, players on this side should be thinking about clearing the space and arriving as the free player. So circulation is to create a free player. And if you need to, that will also include outplaying techniques from a collective point of view. So aggressive positioning to begin with, test how much they want to go with you. Centre backs, you're looking for a 90% pass completion. You're looking to dictate the tempo, which will include slowing down and speeding up, and you circulate until a free player arrives. They are the important principles. Now, if you think about that, I've not said movement patterns, set patterns, because I don't particularly believe in set movement patterns. Now, if you don't want to take the decision away from them, so for example, I watched a webinar last week where centre-backs on the ball, they've worked on a load of different patterns, extremely high level this was, by the way. If the opposition play a diamond, the 8 will come and drop down if the 6 is marked, and then the 8 comes in. As the 8 comes down, he bounces a pass round the corner to the fullback. Well, what happens then if you've worked on that pattern and then you take that option away? So if the opposition fullback decides to fly out and the centre-backs have gone, do you know what, we're all right 2v1 in here. You go and fly out and go and press that and get pressure on high. If you're only working on patterns then and not principles and individual techniques, that player does not have a solution in the game. So my point of view is, and I went through this for years, don't do prescribed patterns, it's about principles. So these are the principles to get to the half. In terms of the second stage, movement ahead of the ball, 7-to-1 movements, first key principle. So movement ahead of the ball can be either when you're at the half and you're trying to get to the final third, or it could be when you're trying to build from getting stage 1 to movement in terms of getting to the half then. So movement ahead of the ball is key from a collective and individual point of view. First thing, 7-to-1 movements. Stole this from the guys at Liverpool, the analysts. They did analysis on the top players in Europe, found that for every movement, every time they receive it, on average, you're looking at 7 movements before it. So, for example, if a left winger receives it, it may have had to run away to come short. It might have had to come short to go in behind as it's building up through that circulation. It might have had to drift inside. He may have had to show an explosive movement to come and receive and not got it. So, what you're trying to do is, the key principle from a learning point of view, especially with young players, you're trying to say to them, have patience with your movement and don't get frustrated. Because if it's every 7 movements for a top Champions League player, that's okay for you to I'm sure everyone imagining this now, so many coaches are going to be watching it going, how many of my players, when they've shown a movement, they get frustrated, arms go in the air and they start blaming other people and blaming external factors. And why are you not showing? Well, I'm not showing because I was showing for the first 20 minutes and they weren't giving it me. So this is building patience from a mentality point of view and patience in terms of variability in the movement. Second thing, arrival movements. We'll look at this more later, but effectively that is a high to low movement where you're coming from a higher line rather than standing in fixed positions in space where the opposition could then organise. Arrival movements that drop in late and the timing late are very, very difficult to get organised for, especially if it's principally, because if you don't know who's going to arrive and you're building on principles and space, there's no way the opposition can know. Next thing, various positions to occupy. This is more when you're at the half, but also when you're playing out in terms of positional balance. So from a coach's point of view, this will be based on your players and your profiles. for example, if you play with 2 and a 1, so 2 centre-backs and 1 in front, you're open to transition. So do you want to defend in a box? Do you want to defend in a 2 and a 3? Is it a 3 and a 2? It's a back 3. Is it a 3 and a 1? So you base the positional balance based on your profiles and whatever you believe in as a coach. I have a very, very specific view on this, but I want to keep this to principles rather than just my views. Reacting to teammates is more principle-based movement. So you're reacting to teammates in space. We'll see a video shortly. 1v1 outplaying, refer back to the 1v1 video on that. Which door is closed? So if you go out one side and it's not on and you've sucked the opposition over, so many teams continue to try and play in that zone and thread balls through when it's tight. When that door's closed, start a better attack and go out the other way, because you're not going to score every time you get in the opposition's half. So if you're not going to do that, you therefore have to be wary of patience with the ball, in terms of you may have to shift it side to side to then go vertically. And within that, you're looking at 150 turnovers for top teams in games. So I use this stat with my players just to say, you need to have under that many, which then dictates how long we're on the ball for in the opposition's half, etc. So you're just looking at minimising the turnovers and prolonged possession, but making it functional. Stage 3, creation. You'll hear a lot of people say this is reliant on individuals. I think it massively helps if you have individuals who can outplay, who can create, who can slide, who can twist and turn, and you have a De Bruyne who can slide people in and with a range of pass, etc. But I believe there's certain principles you can put in place from a creation point of view and a structural point of view that can really help the group when they're in that final third area. First one's crosses, so range of crosses. Look at De Bruyne, look at Trent Alexander. These crosses now are traditionally not particularly coming from wide areas, and I'll run through a video in a minute. It's more inside right, inside left positions. Overlaps, underlaps, play and run forward. So these are all in terms of creation now. If I play this video, opposition's in a low block. So you are looking for, if they're playing a back 4, effectively you've got different channels. You've got 2 outside channels and then 3 centrally. So you've got 5 channels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that you're trying to get in behind with your creation. You don't want teams who are going to keep possession in front. You're looking to slide into those zones.
Tim, 1v1 playing techniques when you're getting to the half. You've talked and you've tweeted about the percentages of where pressure comes from. How do you plan this in your training sessions, and how do you do that with technical work with centre-backs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was originally introduced to this concept at Wigan by Roberto Martinez, and this was his kind of this was his huge thing around individual development, that every single player throughout the youth development must be able to outplay individuals in 1v1 situations. So very, very quickly, split pressure into different ways. So defender in front, defender behind, defender on the side, defender on the recovering angle, and then being able to dominate your opponent without the ball. So 5 1v1 situations. We find a lot now that in a lot of practices and games, defender behind and on the side kind of rolls into one, really. So being able to play in this 360-degree environment and isolating these 1v1 situations, the way to do it really, Gary, is try and do this at the start of session. So every team, no matter whether it's first team all the way down to U9s that we work with, I will do 10 to 15 minutes every session on 1v1 situations, a range of scenarios. Again, that's a huge topic in itself, but being able to combine off people, being able to use people to outplay, so that ability to stay on the ball when there's no option for you, that kind of Thiago Busquets, being able to twist and turn out of pressure. And then going back to your original point of different positions, a centre-back, for example, will be pressed predominantly over 80% from the front or on the side, obviously from a number 9. So the techniques on a centre-back will be different than a striker who has the percentages the other way around when they're then pressed from behind. So I think younger down, certainly in youth development, it's really important to develop all the scenarios. And then as your identity starts getting closer to first team and it starts becoming more fixed in youth development ages and older, it's then about refining it to the specific 1v1 situations that the player will face in a game.
That 7-to-1 movement, you mentioned there about the mentality. Like sometimes I find that it's it's almost tough to get a 2-to-1 movement. Like, what are some ways coaches can get more from that there rather than just shout and move all the time?
Yeah, I think it comes in your session designs. Been there. Every single team I've ever worked with does the exact same, Gary. I'm sure everyone can relate to it. It's the frustration and the chats at half time of games of you've given up your angles are not sharp enough, your movements are not, well, I'm not getting the ball, there's no space here, and blaming external factors all the time. So it's that teaching process of establishing the behaviours of recognising that if top players are only receiving it every 7 movements that they make, and it comes down to your session design. So it's difficult on a webinar like this, but for example, again, your 1v1 practice at the beginning or when you go into possession, again, always having the same messages and trying to isolate in your position specific. Okay, if it's a midfielder, these are the type of movements you may make, which will be slow drifting movements, whereas a wingers would be more explosive or run away to come short behind, drop inside. So again, just establishing that specificity the older you get through your session design.
Is that something as well that you would follow up with players in video too at the older level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the older you get, more of the, I mean, there's an argument that the better work gets done really away from it in videos. Absolutely. So yeah, when you start getting close to first team, certainly the learning moments come more in the video work and highlighting them moments of arriving in certain spaces. What were you thinking at this point? Just walking through that decision-making process from a movement and space point of view.
The last one for me is that technical work, and you've shown this on social media and other webinars and even books as well. You mentioned there about starting at the beginning of exercises. You still value that work in isolation to get players comfortable at different ranges, different skills.
Yeah, again, I think the more coaching I do, Gary, the more experience I gain, the more I do kind of tend to go more towards this individual side and individual development. Even with first team players, I think it's so important. Every player wants to improve. Every player wants to become better. If you see a door, you want to open it and walk through it. I think once that is so important, that side. So yeah, the individual development, this ability to understand your own identity and understand your own 1v1 receiving within that and how that relates to you. So vital.
If you are roughly speaking attacking with 5 and defending with 5, would the defensive 5 also structure in 2 lines when resting to cover more of the space and try to sustain the attack / delay if they come through attacking lines? Is that the objective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think whether you do a 3 and a 2 or a 2 and a 3 or whatever you choose to do, if you want to do a 2 and a 2, I think it'll be dictated by your profile. So to Sarah's question there, if you have, so if you've got a Kante, for example, that can cover spaces and shift laterally really quickly and understands tactically how to fill in for fullbacks when they go high, etc., you can defend with less. If you have someone who lacks mobility, and certainly if you're a youth coach and you don't have that, they don't have that explosivity or the tactical understanding, I think that's when you go more as a 5. I find with my experience now, every team I coach, it's a balance of 2-3 or 3 and a 2, and that ability to cover the spaces both wide and on 2 different lines as well. Yeah, and obviously the more dominant you are with the 70% possession in the territory of the opposition's half, the easier that becomes and the spaces get more restricted. So if say we can make the opposition defend in 2 banks and just with a central 9, a striker on their own, and they start drifting more towards their own goal, well, our defenders then can start squeezing even higher and those lines can get more compacted. So again, principles always relating back to what we were talking about before on defending that half. But yeah, certainly defending on 2 different lines with 5 players allows you to cover laterally as well.
Peter has asked crossing, love chatting about crossing. This is a good question. Are there specific areas of the field that you're asking the players to create, or is it, I lost it there, or is it find free players, or like what's the kind of instructions, the coaching instructions for crossing?
It depends on the player you have, I think. So it will depend on the identity of the player. It'll depend on the system that you're setting up. It'll depend on what spaces you're asking them to go in. very difficult without specific examples. But if you have a Trent, for example, who can deliver from the outside, then you can really overload the middle and leave him wide, because then you know he's got the ability, if you can shift it quick enough and circulate it quick enough and switch play well, you've got someone who can deliver from different areas. Where if you've got more of a winger who drifts inside, it then becomes about, so for example, if you have a De Bruyne who's playing in that inside pocket, well, you are going to need someone on the outside, even if they can't deliver, to occupy that space to be able to then free up De Bruyne in those spaces. So it's a really good question. I think it's really difficult without walking through the identities of a specific team and the way they play.
Can you overcoach that in terms of set? You have to be in this area. Sometimes you see those graphics that are different color coded. Can you put too much restrictions on youth teams?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Yeah, and I've been guilty of that previously, which is why I kind of arrive at the beliefs I have now. I think, again, it depends on your profile. So if I look for it, and the other thing on this is, particularly in youth development, you don't know what position that player is going to end up playing. So, for example, if I look to the Liverpool team I had at U14, Nico Williams was a right winger and only ever played right winger. He didn't play one time as a right back ever, and wouldn't have even considered it as well. Now he ends up playing in the Champions League as a right back. So his ability comes from that ability to be able to go 1v1, play high up as well. So I think it's going back to that question, Gary, particularly in youth players, you don't know what position they're going to be, because you see so many players. I've had conversations with so many centre-backs who are playing first team at Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two, and over 80-90% of them were strikers, were centre midfielders, were wingers. So I'm always conscious of that now, of this identity of you don't actually know what position they're going to play until you really start getting in older ages.
Yeah, very interesting. Michael's asked a few questions. I'll pick his best one. Dealing with players that are, a little bit resistant to instructions, maybe at youth level. A lot of the technical work and tactical work we've talked about today. What about some of the psychological challenges that you might face at that age group, 16, 17?
Yeah, I think it's part of the job. I think the higher level player you deal with, the more ego and the more the bigger personality, the bigger character that you deal with. I think it's part of the job. So I think it comes down to the coach's personality. I think it comes down to the coach's experience. That is ultimately more important than, in my opinion, more important than anything we've gone through tonight. So that ability to, there's some coaches that I know with amazing knowledge who can't get the message over because they can't engage with an individual with their personality. And then there's some with less knowledge who get more out of players because they can really engage them. So I think it comes down to your ability to actually really get inside the head of each individual player, and that is more important than anything on that webinar that we spoke about just now.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like if you mentioned there the coaches that are able to impact with personality, like that's what we grew up with coaches that got our attention, enthusiasm, things like that. If you lack that as a coach, what can you do?
I think it's really difficult. It comes down to your personality. So if I think of my favourite coaches when I was a kid, they're not even coaches that were at pro clubs that I was at. It was teachers in school. It was a coach I had at grassroots, because I engaged in what they were doing. It might not even be the most complex practices. I remember my favourite one might have been King of the Ring, dribbling with each other, kicking the ball out of the circle. But they're the memories you have. I'd have taken information more from them, who I believed in, more than coaches who I had at pro clubs later on, who had a lot better knowledge, but didn't really care about me improving, didn't really invest in me, just wanted the next player straight away. So ultimately, I think it does come down to your personality traits as an individual, as a coach.
Ryan has asked about, so if you have players that are conditioned to be direct and maybe they've not been coached in a possession style, rather than start with passing patterns and passing exercises, what are some ways that they can do that?
So I think it comes down then to your session design. So, for example, I've just come from a session now, and we've been working with our centre-backs on making them be more comfortable with the decision-making from an execution point of view. if I would have introduced straight away pressure on what we were trying to do, it wouldn't have been as effective as what we were doing. So if I have a player like that, is it Ryan? You said that asked the question.
Yep.
If I had a player like that with Ryan, I would then break it down from that. If you have unopposed here and you have fully opposed here in games, there's that sliding scale, isn't there, of constantly moving them up that to where you can get it where it's fully opposed in that chaotic decision making of even numbers of 11v11, 8v8, 7v7, whatever your format and your age is. Some individuals, you need to kind of work with them to drop the ego, if you like, and be able to sell it to them to start again down here and go, okay, we're going to look at decision making of, right, repetition behaviours of punching it through a line. So what are the distance of passes that you're playing as a centre-back? Was it a centre-back you spoke about? Yeah, who were going like. So what is the distances that they play those passes? Can we replicate those in game, in training, in an isolated exercise? So I might take two centre-backs and a centre midfielder, and I'll put various gates of 2-yard gates at different angles. And then the centre-back has to receive circulation pass, fizz it through a gate and find a centre midfielder. Centre midfielder turns, plays back, start again. So getting reps of that. So they're receiving the circulation pass. The first touch is going forwards. It's first touch manipulation into the direction you want to go. And then it's giving them reps of seeing angles, seeing movement, open body shape for the midfielder. So to answer that question, it's more than if I had that situation, I would break it down from an individual point of view. Now, I know it's not easy because all coaches don't have two individuals, or someone can take the rest of them while you pull that individual out or unit, etc. But I think it's about being creative with what you do have.
Well, just on that, would you know, as a youth coach that maybe has a couple of assistants, would you advise that to be like, listen, take Johnny or Susie and maybe do a little bit extra and get them back in the exercise and break it up like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we never have our big thing. Every club I've been at, you never have staff standing around. So rather than me taking a session and you're standing there, every coach that I work with now knows that they're either working with an individual in the practice. So we'll walk through the practice before, and they're in the middle, and we've spoke about things from the weekend, and they're giving instructions within that, or they'll pull that individual out while I'm doing, and I'll just go 7v6 or whatever it may be, and they're working with them and they're putting them back in. It may be at the start of the practice isolated where someone takes all of them and then another coach will take 3 or 4. So again, being creative with your space and the staff that you've got. But I hate seeing coaches hands in the pocket standing another one next to them, because it's then the players that are missing out.
Last couple, Josh has asked, all right, you've got a high football IQ or a player who has high technical and physical ability and maybe not the IQ. Which one do you side with?
That's a great question. We'll take both of them. Yeah. What I've, in all seriousness, what I found, I have this conversation quite a lot actually with coaches at academies. What I found, Gary, the longer I go with this game is the cycle. If I look at the players that I've worked with over the last 12 years who've become professional and who've gone on to higher levels, it wasn't the best technical and tactical players younger. It was always the players who had the psychological ability for repetition, competitiveness, the mental toughness, if you like, the ability to constantly assess themselves, not make excuses. Just that psychological skill set, I think, is the one that drives you over the line. Honestly, I've looked through every player and I've tried to find set patterns of players who got through the system, come back to it all the time. And I think you can improve that from a psychological point of view, but I don't think you can ever make it a 1 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. I think that psychological mindset of competitiveness, of the willingness to learn, the self-motivation to go out if you're not good at something and go and work on it at home. I think if you don't have that, there's not many instances I've seen where people have got that over the years. That's a much longer conversation, but as it put it shortly, yeah.
Yeah, big time. I mean, is that something, that Liverpool environment that you mentioned, like Champions League players nowadays, when they were 14, 15, was it the environment that was just constantly pushing them? Was it something that was special about what they were doing on a daily basis? Was it the type of coaching or a bit of everything?
Well, I think you can drag players there in a certain way. So, for example, if you have a player, I won't run through names on it, but I had a player at a club I was at who was you would say psychologically went missing a bit, struggled in terms of competitiveness. Technically, absolutely outstanding. They were an international player. So what we did in sessions was put them against. So say for example, we do 1v1s at the beginning. We would always put them against someone who was horrible, kick them, really competitive. So they drag that side out of them. So it gets to the point where you sink or swim with that, doesn't it? You either go with it or you go, I don't want anything to do with it. And what we did was we did that over a long period. So when we go into a 4v4 practice, we'll put that individual against that one, and I'll say to them, listen, just do me a favour, just mark him out of the game here. Don't let him go anywhere. Like, just treat it as a 1v1 situation. And I'm not telling the other player that. We're just saying, now if you need to have that conversation, then I would then say, listen, we're testing you here. And little things like I've seen first team coaches who, when they want to build that mentality, they won't give free kicks against certain individuals and things like that. So I think you can manipulate it, but I do go back to, I think it's very difficult if you really lack all that side to learn it, in my experience.
Brilliant. Tim, outstanding. We've gone 3 minutes over. I apologise. Kept you up late.
No problem. Absolute pleasure. Thanks everyone for coming on. I've not done any of these in a while, to be honest. Used to do them quite a lot, and I'm always kind of genuinely really humbled by people giving the time up and coming on. So thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Have a great Christmas, and we'll keep in touch.
You too. Thanks, Gary.
Magic.